G'day, everybody. How's it going out there? Well, there is a interesting post made on the internet, an open letter, as it were, by a person who was a staff member on a convention. And it's very rare that you get to see an inner glimpse at the underworkings of a convention and the perspective, an open and somewhat honest perspective from, people who are in positions of decision making in the furry fandom. So I think it's a very important thing to kind of go over this letter and sort of the grievances and, I'll give my opinion on it because, hey, he placed it on the internet. That's what happens when you place things on the internet. You're gonna get 2 cents from people you didn't ask a penny for. But I will say I do kind of, as a person who logs things in fandom and fandom history, I always do appreciate it when, people come out in the open and talk about things, especially people who are in decision-making positions, circumstances, notwithstanding. It's very rare that you get an opportunity to do that, though it's not unheard of. And recently, another writer at Flera was able to, create an article about Furrydelphia, and he did talk to the convention staff there and learn that the convention is in the black for the first time. And what that means, for those of you not into the financial lingo, in the black means that the convention is finally making enough money so that they can have extra by the time they get to the next year to kind of use for growth expenditures, or to not have to push for increasing costs as greatly. Obviously depending on whether they're the other factors, such as like the convention centers or the hotels, decide to play nice, right? If they don't also aggressively increase their prices, you don't have to increase your prices. There's a lot of factors that come into play. But it's a good thing. Being in the black is a good thing because it means that it is financially stable. And likewise, with Furrydelphia, this other convention that this person talked to is also in the black. But as we're going to find out, the person who was responsible for allegedly putting it in the black is the person who's writing the disgruntled letter. This is by YappyFox. They were a staff member in one of the, I believe, the co-chairs for Megaplex, which is the Florida Furry Convention. That's been around for over a decade now. So they let out their grievances because they were really recently ousted from staff. In a non-voluntary manner, right? They were basically pushed out of staff by other staff members. And so when reading this, understand that it's under a state of grief, of, frustration, the 5 stages of grief: bargaining, frustration, anger, those kind of emotions played things, and depression. And you're going to obviously see that. So instead of like summarizing what YappyFox said, YappyFox is also, I'll also note before we begin, he's also known as the fox with the symbol at the beginning of the Anthrocon Fursuit Parade. Ever since the Anthrocon Fursuit Parade came to being, YappyFox has been in front with his little like symbol and like clanging the cymbal at the front of the line. So he's also known for that. And so you'll know, and knowing that is very important when we read this letter, because it does kind of make reference to, attending AC and their feelings about that. So without further ado, let me read through this whole thing. For over 20 years, Megaplex was my life's work. My heart, my hustle, my everything. I poured in time, money, and health to build something for the furry community, only to have it ripped away in a way that still feels like a knife in the back. I'm sharing my story because the truth matters, not just for me, but for everyone who believed in what we created. In 2001, Furry Spring Break, or FSB, was created and run by a single individual, not a company or formal organization. There was no corporate structure, just one person taking on the responsibility. When plans for a second year began, the hotel required 2 signatures on the contract, but no one, including myself, was willing to put their personal assets on the line. As a homeowner, I wasn't willing to risk everything. Knowing how unpredictable conventions can be, especially in the furry community, where chaos sometimes isn't far behind. The original founder refused to incorporate, so no corporate veil could protect the signers. With no one willing to co-sign, he canceled the event and walked away, despite many people already having flights booked to Florida. That's when a small group of us stepped in. We formed a C Corporation, Paw Pet Live Experiences Incorporated, and signed the hotel contract under this new entity. That saved the event and led to the birth of Megaplex #1. The con went forward, giving everyone who had already booked flights a place to gather. The early years were hard. We often failed to meet our hotel room block minimums, and I personally paid out of pocket to cover the shortfalls, so we wouldn't default on the contracts. I also funded the AV equipment for the first several years, as the con didn't have a budget to buy nor rent gear. Eventually, once the con grew, I sold the equipment to the organization at a loss of nearly 70%. At one point, a treasurer failed to file taxes, sales, state, and federal, which I only found out after tax liens were placed on accounts. I had to secure a $30,000 personal loan to cover the back taxes and penalties and avoid criminal charges. I was the only board member with tangible assets, so if the IRS decided to pierce the corporate veil, I was the one they would come after. I restructured and tightened the con's budget to pay off that loan in 2 years. Thanks to those efforts and many more, I left Megaplex in a strong financial position, enough to survive the COVID-19 shutdown. When events resumed, the con was not only stable, but growing again. Then things changed. I supported bringing in new board members after COVID, believing in the need for new energy and perspectives. But some of these individuals had barely 1 con's worth of experience. They quickly voted out all senior members, including myself, citing reasons that, in my case, were based on misinformation. I later discovered that the person acting as the con's HR rep, someone I never got along with, had been actively withholding communications and concerns from me. I wasn't ignoring issues. I simply never knew about them. After we were forced out, that same HR person was eventually removed, but the damage was done. We had built Megaplex into one of the top 10 furry conventions in the United States. It had finally reached the point of self-sustainability. Ironically, none of those who replaced us had the means to keep it afloat had things gone south. But because it was now on solid footing, they didn't have the risk that we had. I never wanted the spotlight. I never served as con chair, though I co-chaired a few years. My role was always behind the curtain. Paperwork, finances, insurance, licensing, tech, registration systems. Most attendees didn't even know I was involved. That was fine with me. I just wanted to make sure things worked. We built that con from the ground up. And when it was strong enough to stand on its own, it was taken from us. And instead of starting out their own event, this new group walked in, took over something others had poured years and tens of thousands of dollars into. For over 20 years, I gave Megaplex my time, money, energy, and health. I worked 40 plus hours a month, year-round. Meanwhile, some board members only showed up for the 4-day con and did nothing in between. After we were gone, they changed policy so that the board no longer had any hands-on responsibility. Now, volunteers are treated poorly, communication is non-existent, and morale has collapsed. Staff are left in the dark, something I worked hard to prevent. Now they're paying people to fill basic staff roles because no one wants to volunteer under this leadership. When board changes occurred during my time, we always kept lines of communication open. We offered lifetime attendance to ongoing members and always encouraged them to stay on staff. But when Scooby, Stitch, and I were removed, the door was slammed in our faces. No communication, no thank you, just silence. It was the coldest, most disrespectful treatment of any board member in the history of the con. As much as Megaplex meant to me, and it meant the world, I can no longer attend. That chapter was forcibly closed. I can't return while the current leadership remains. This was the biggest part of my life. I invested over $40,000 in 20 years into it. When something so core to your identity is ripped away, it's devastating. I've struggled to find purpose since. The only thing that keeps me going now is the thin numbness held in place by meds. I don't know if I'll ever even forgive what was done to us. I just hope that someday people remember the work that was done and the sacrifices that made it possible. The only thing that keeps me going... Okay, we got that. 25. People keep suggesting I should start a new event or get involved with others, but I just can't. After everything that happened, I lost all the motivation I once had. For the past 4 years, I've avoided local meets, partly because I don't want to run into the people who are responsible for all this. The only conventions I still go to are AC and FWA, and even those are hard for me. At this point, the only reason I keep going is because I've never missed one, and it feels like a personal challenge to keep that streak alive. But the truth is, when I do go, I don't really participate. I don't attend panels, dances, or main events. I don't even step into the ballroom anymore. I mostly stay in my room. I used to go to movies every week, but now I don't care about them at all. Even going out to dinner feels like a struggle. The only time I leave the house for those things is when people pressure me into it and won't let up until I give in. Before I had found furry, I was a hermit. I didn't date, didn't take vacations, didn't do anything social. Even back in high school and college, I never went to parties or social gatherings. Furry was what finally changed that. It gave me the ability to get into a crowd without panicking. But now, I feel I've lost that progress. I'm back in panic mode. I feel bad when new people try to meet me because I just freeze up. I panic, shut down, and probably come across like I'm uninterested or cold. But it isn't that. I just can't handle being around people anymore. People always say that time heals, but in my case it feels like things are only getting worse. I no longer fursuit without a cause. If I'm not at work, I don't get out of bed. A weekend is usually 48 hours in bed, sleeping, where there may be a good dream to give me solace or more often a nightmare to wake me up in a panic. I'm broken and no longer feel happiness. For now, I'm still hanging on to FPS. That's the Furry Paw Pet Show. Since I feel that there is purpose there for others that are involved in it. I still like tinkering with the tech behind it. I'm definitely not the performance talents behind it anymore since the music licensing took that away. What I did when the first show first started, which was just lip syncing to songs. But as the evolution has happened, the rest of the cast has been able to interact and entertain the audience, and I try to keep the platform going. It's basically the last hobby I participate in. So right now, seeing any friends I would love to see again, but all of them have this Ousted Megaplex in their taglines. Nearly 90% of my timelines. It just feels like a stake in the heart knowing I won't be seeing them. And to make it even worse, I attempt to go to Denver to get away from Orlando. And the locals to Denver and the locals of Denver decide to head to Florida instead, so that just adds to the frustration. And that's where he ends it. It's kind of it's kind of a strange ending, as it were, because it kind of sounds like it doesn't have a conclusion, but that was the end. Obviously, it's a hard thing to deal with when you reach that situation. I know a local furry to me who was involved in a major furry media project that lasted over a decade, and dedicated, I believe, his personal finances to it as well, and it ended up being basically upended without it basically ended up being upended, and accosted from him. And now for the last half a decade now, he's been sort of wanting to get back into it, but his health and his health is not cooperating, basically. So it's not the only story I've heard about furries who are creators or furries who are in the creative space, having basically feeling like they got stabbed in the back or things changed in a way that they couldn't foresee. So I think it's always, and I think for at least the local fur, I don't think had anything to fall back on. They had the one thing in the furry fandom, and it was that show similar to the Paw Pet show, but they weren't involved in any cons or anything like that. So as soon as that one thing fell apart, his whole stake in the furry fandom fell apart, and he didn't have any backups, similar to YappyFox. And so at least I will say, if there is a silver lining, at least YappyFox does have the furry Paw Pet, the Sunday Fundy Paw Pet show, furry Paw Pet show, to keep in at least some engagement that he seems to at least somewhat enjoy as a hobby. I would advise any furry who is going to a convention because of simply tradition to stop. It's not a good thing, especially as inflation and things like that, and it gets more expensive, and the benefit of going to conventions decreases over time, because it does. And that's something I had to come to terms with, and I think it's something that post-COVID sort of showed me. It's I can enjoy furry fandom and furries and furry friends, and engaging with friends who are furries and non-furries alike, and I can become a better and wholer person by not worrying about, let me get that hotel room in the Midwest Fur Fest before it all closes out, and getting all panicky about FOMO and things like that. It'll eradicate the FOMO and the things. Tradition, if you go back to one of the other videos I did, and one of the polls that we did for Flare, it was what makes you choose to go to a furry convention? And one or two people answered tradition. I wonder if YappyFox was the one who answered that way, because they've clearly been this way for a while. And usually a person who says, I'm just doing it because of tradition, because it's what I've always done, it's not a great thing to get caught up in. It's usually traditions are traditions only benefit one group, and that is the people running the convention. Or if you're talking about holidays, tradition is only useful for the people who want to make money off of that tradition of that holiday, right? So you shouldn't get caught up in traditions. You should do things because you want to do them, or be prepared to make new traditions, because everything comes to an end eventually. You can go to a convention for as long as you live and have a 100% streak, but one day you're going to pass on, or one day or the convention will pass on, or maybe one year you're going to get really desperate because you can't, they sell out. Let's say Anthrocon does end up hitting the cap thing, and they end up putting a cap on attendance, and you don't get an attendance thing. You're kind of SOL at that point, unless you ghost the convention. But does that really count as being in attendance, because you didn't pay for attendance? So the world will make plans for you if you don't make plans for yourself. And the funny and sort of the sad irony in a sort of weird and funny way is when you like, I don't have kids. Many furries probably don't have kids. There's a handful of furries that are parents. And to those furries, like, thank you for trying to raise the next generation. But those kids are going to be their own beings too, right? They're going to grow up to be something completely new. They're going to rebel. They're going to seek out new hobbies that their parents might not be into. And I think furries would be good at supporting their kid, right? If they sort of find new hobbies. Like maybe a furry's kid would like sports, and furries typically don't like sports. Maybe they just don't like furry at all. They're like, oh, this furry thing is like, they might even call it, the things that they might become a furry hater. You never know. They might become straight or gay. And that's the thing about parents, is you never know what your kid's going to grow up to be. And, good parents will be supportive of their kids no matter what legal decisions they make in their lives. Even if and that can come sometimes with that love or respect not going both ways. There are many times that kids grow up and they cut off their parents. As one song once said, you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone. The times they are a-changin'. And because the times they are a-changin', you may eventually, see the child that you raised, whether that child is a flesh and blood human being or an organization, a company, an institution, a small business, a convention. Eventually, the times they are a-changin', and the people involved in those organizations may oust the parents. And at that point, it can be very hard. Like, and let's take for instance, and the interesting thing is that, a parent, and this is probably my biggest criticism of the writing. I liked it, and I do empathize. But my biggest criticism with it is, well, he's like, I spent $40,000 and 20 years of my life into this. And that price point and that amount of time is about the time that it takes to raise a child. And the amount of money that it probably takes to raise a child these days. So if the child decides, I don't want to have anything to do with this parent anymore, and, you can see it as a waste of money. But I think if your friends are going to that convention and enjoying themselves, then that means you did create something good. The worst thing that can happen, obviously, is that convention does end up biting it. Now, I don't know if YappyFox feels that way, and that maybe he would like to see that child of his, rot on the vine. And given the fact that there was an issue this year that was similar to Anthrocon in 2024, where, registration was a crap show where people were waiting in line for 5 hours, 4 hours, just to get in the door. That is, there is some crack showing in the organization. And, I did a poll like that, like I did with Anthrocon, but unfortunately for me, like, the number of people who read Flera and go to Megaplex is actually a lot smaller than the people who go to, the Pittsburgh convention and go to Anthrocon. Because a lot of furries answered the Anthrocon one about, like, how long they waited in line. And I got a good range of, like, 3 to 5 hours. Whereas this one, I've got, like, about 3 to 5 hours, but it's only like 1 or 2 people reporting that. And everyone else is like, I'm done, go. Let me see the numbers. But given that circumstance, I think that, Megaplex is showing some struggle under this new leadership. And, it's no longer Yappy's circus. It's no longer his circus. They ousted him. They ousted his folks. they honestly shouldn't give them the time of day if they want to be cut off. And if your child cuts you off, then they're cut off, right? It works both ways, right? If a adult child cuts off their parents from the family, like they can't just come crawling back and expect there not to be tension. It is that same emotion. One would hope that, furries in Florida basically are aware of the situation and the possible outcomes. The one outcome is that this young blood, eventually learns through their own trials and tribulations and own stories of how to get their act together and, maintain the convention and maintain it in the black and keep it upright, or they're going to fail. And to the people of Florida, it's like, you got to be prepared for that failure. Have backup plans. And here's the thing, if the Denver convention is at the same time as Megaplex is each year, then that's a possible other opportunity to, as a transition thing. Unfortunately, it will suck for local Florida furries who can't travel a long distance, but maybe they can, create their own meets as well if, as a backup plan. And I think for any large convention, you should always have like a backup plan with like different friend groups. If you need to I took the time off for the convention, but the convention sold out or the convention fell apart or something. So let's do this instead, right? Have a backup plan. Have don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's the whole premise of this video. Do not put all your eggs in one basket. Have a plan B. That way you don't have to sit there commiserating going, I was gonna do that, but now I'm staying at home because plan A didn't work. I think but I will end this saying I'm very grateful for Yappy putting this up, as much as criticism as he's probably gotten for putting it up. And he obviously is probably not going to be working with many conventions at this point because, he's shown that he will, if there's a problem, he's going to express it on the internet. But at this point, I think that, he's run his tenure and, he wanted to share this experience. And I think it's an important experience to share because, there is interpolitics. There is this ebb and flow when you get involved in larger furry organizations. And sometimes it's going to get nasty and sometimes it's not going to be in your favor. And sometimes you are left hollowed out by it. As I said, the local fur has a very similar story to YappyFox, and and I talk with him every once in a while. So anyways, that's all I got for this one. What are your thoughts on the letter and the situation? Kick that like, kick the subscribe button, kick a comment in the comment section, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.